Okay, it's 12 noon, December 6th. This is a regular assembly member, or meeting rather. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Bob,
Here.
Jeff,
Here.
Mark,
Here.
Jay.
Here.
Chelsea. Here. Dave,
Here.
Thomas.
Okay, we have a full assembly today with member Stanton Gregor zooming in. So it's now time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. That brings us to item 3, approval of minutes. There's minutes from the meeting of November 17th, 2021. It was a special and regular meeting. I'd entertain a motion to approve those unless there's changes.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any amendments to today's meeting agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented.
So move. Second.
Okay, no amendments being made. All those in favor say aye. Moving forward.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, none. Okay, we have 2 public hearings today. First public hearing is for ordinance 2021-18, an ordinance updating various provisions of chapter 14.16 of the municipal code entitled Electric Utility and including electric rate and connection cost increases. Is there anybody that wants to participate in this public hearing today? Seeing none in the audience and seeing nobody zooming or calling in, that public hearing is closed. Now we have a public hearing for ordinance 2021-21, an emergency ordinance continuing a public health and safety measure, requirement of face coverings in indoor public settings to address current community COVID-19 outbreak. Is there anybody that would like to comment under this public hearing? Okay, seeing none, that public hearing is closed. Bid awards, there are none. Persons to be heard. Clerk Thompson, were there any people zooming or calling in?
Yes, Mayor, we'll allow Dana Tinas to speak first.
Okay. Mrs. Tinas, you have the floor. Are you there?
Yes, I just pressed star mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you, Mayor Jensen. Back in the 1960s, a psychologist at Yale ran a number of experiments, which have come to be known as the Milgram Experiments. These experiments called for actors to play the parts of a test subject seated in a remote room and hooked up to an electrical device that could administer jolts of electricity all the way up to a fatal jolt, and also an authority figure dressed appropriately in a white lab coat who would give orders to a person who was the actual test subject, an ordinary person who would be asked to follow orders even to administering fatal jolts of electricity. This person seated next to the fake electrical panel did not know that the others were actors and that they were the actual test subject. If you've ever seen the original Ghostbusters, then you have seen the Milgram Experiment. What was the experiment? To see who would follow orders even to violating their own conscience. This experiment grew out of the dismay and horror the whole world experienced when they learned of the concentration camps and systematic genocide carried out in Nazi Germany. No one could understand how decent people could do such things. The cry, "But I was just doing my job and I was following orders," did not seem to be enough of an answer. Surely there was something wrong with the German people. What Stanley Milgram found was that 67% of us, 67% of all humans, would follow the orders of the fake doctor in spite of the screams and eventual silence from the next room. where they could not see the victim, all the way up to the fatal jolts. They would continue to obey the orders of the white-coated authorities, even when reduced to tears and begging and saying, please, I have to stop, I have to stop. The authority would always say the experiment must go on. What kind of policemen and employees do we want in our borough? Thugs like the cops in Australia who are apparently happy to slam people to the ground for not wearing a mask? Or people with good character who will pause and consider what is right when interacting with the public? I don't know Chief Kerr, but I would shake his hand if I met him for being the type of man who will search his conscience rather than blindly obey any order given to him. It may seem to make sense to have robotic men and women who unthinkingly carry out orders given to them, any orders from on high, but those were the kind of people who enabled the genocide of World War II and all genocides before and after. Thank you.
Is that your testimony today, Mrs. Tinas?
That's it.
Okay, thank you for your input. Anyone else, Clerk Thompson, calling in?
Yes, next we have Rebecca Knight.
Okay, you have the floor, Mrs. Knight.
Hi, Mayor and Assembly members. My name is Becky Knight. As a prime sponsor, Senator Murkowski recently introduced her latest version of the so-called Landless Legislation, S3269, and immediately referred it to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It is another in a long series of her singular-minded public land raids for resource extraction. The bill would privatize, the bill would privatize 115,000 plus acres of already fully utilized public land to Native residents of 5 Southeast communities for the purpose of forming corporations. It would gift them millions of dollars of taxpayer-funded infrastructure, including roads, bridges, trails, and marine access facilities. The selections would displace existing public uses. In June, the borough cited several unresolved concerns about the bill and decided to postpone a position until the final version of the legislation was presented to the Senate. Accordingly, that time has come. I request that you take a position. In 1971, ANCSA was widely accepted to finalize Alaska Indigenous land claims. Yet in 2014, Senator Murkowski instead asserted claims were final after passage of her 70,000 acre Sealaska bill. I ask, when is final truly final? Federal public lands should remain in federal public hands. The impacts of the legislation to residents, visitors, fish and wildlife populations, and the American taxpayer have not been fully vetted. That natives from these communities have been, quote, waiting 50 years, end quote, is not due to an oversight or an inadvertent omission. Their exclusion from village status was informed, considered, and an intentional determination under ANCSA. They simply did not qualify under 3 basic criteria, as various high-level agency officials have repeatedly written and testified before Congress regarding similar versions of the bill. As specifically enumerated by these officials, as well as the framers of ANCSA, natives from these communities received equitable treatment. They were not, quote, left out. In fact, they are at-large shareholders of Sealaska and hold surface and subsurface rights. Senator Murkowski has been glaringly absent from any public discussion regarding this precedent-setting legislation and has exhibited little, if any, leadership on her bill. There have been no congressional field hearings. She proposed the disposition of these public lands only a few days following the announcement of her candidacy for another term of office. The timing is not coincidental. The Assembly previously sent a letter raising concerns about the proposed legislation to our delegation. You also sent them a list of important questions regarding its impacts on the borough. To my knowledge, there has been no reply. However, a response was received from corporate lobbyists, predictably in support of the bill. Their answers were largely ambiguous and incomplete. Withdrawal of 2 Portage Bay Forest Service cabins from inclusion in the current bill are only minor improvements and were likely included in earlier versions as future deal-making fodder. Borough residents' concerns do not end at the borough boundaries. We travel far and wide in Southeast Alaska. Other major concerns remain completely unaddressed. For instance, and this is important, first, why must the Tongass National Forest bear the brunt of land selections while state mental health trust and university lands are not also asked to share in that burden? Second, the landless groups assume an entitlement to one township or 23,000 acres each based on the corporations and other corporations in Southeast. However, had the 5 corporations been included in ANCSA, perhaps Congress would have allowed less than one township to each of the Southeast corporations, or perhaps it would have allotted land to See Alaska on less than a 1-to-1 ratio with each village and urban corporation. Third, it is notable that eligible native enrollment in these communities varies widely. However, each corporation would receive equal acreage, raising the basis for yet more claims of inequity. In the words of Jim Lyons and Sylvia Baca, previous secretary and undersecretaries of the Interior and Agriculture departments, quote, recognition of the 5 landless communities could reopen the entire settlement scheme of ANCSA and result in a never-ending, extremely costly and unattainable effort to effect total equality of treatment among all natives and all communities, end quote. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you for your testimony today, Mrs. Knight. Are there any other people calling in, Clerk Thompson? I just got a email or a note that Mr. Beebe's trying to call in and he couldn't. Did you get that message?
I got it too. I'm going to try to send him the link to the meeting.
Okay.
But let's see, if having anybody else on the line right now, I would say we do not. So do you want to give me a quick minute?
Yeah, we'll see if there's anybody in the audience that wants to
great idea.
testify to persons to be heard related to the agenda. Mr. Lee? Okay, please state your name, who you represent.
My name is Eric Lee, representing myself. It's good to see the Assembly resuming discussion of Senate Bill 3269, which is a without land bill, which has far-reaching consequences for Petersburg and all Alaska. It is a precedent-setting bill. Senator Murkowski claims that this bill is about equity. It is true that any bill attempting to divide land along racial and ethnic lines must have equity as its guiding principle. Yet the imperative of equity seems very lacking in this bill. For example, this bill, Senate Bill 3269, applies the one-size-fits-all approach to the quantity of land each community would receive, which is about 23,000 acres each. Excuse me. The result of this one-size-fits-all approach would be that shareholders in the villages with the least shareholders would receive many times more acreage per capita than shareholders in communities with the largest number of shareholders. One must ask why a bill such as this, purporting to be about equity, contains such a fundamental inequity. So an important question to ask Senator Murkowski is why the one-size-fits-all approach was used in this bill instead of an allocation on a basis of equal per capita. Surely allocation on a per capita basis would result in a far more equitable distribution of land. Another inequity that would be created by this bill has to do with the sharing and distribution of revenues generated through resource extraction. As outlined in Articles 7I and 7J of ANCSA, revenues generated by the resource extraction are to be collected and shared by all the regional corporations. At the time the ANCSA language was being drafted, it was recognized that the Native peoples in communities that would not qualify for village corporation status needed compensation, just as those living in villages that would qualify for village corporation status and land. So in lieu of not qualifying for village corporation status and therefore land, of their own from which to generate revenues through resource extraction, they would receive compensation from revenues generated by the resource extraction on lands that the qualifying corporations received. This revenue sharing arrangement was considered fair and equitable at the time, as it was recognized that under this arrangement, the without land shareholders would generally receive dividend checks that were greater than their shareholder counterparts that did qualify for village corporation status and land. The economic booms in the timber and oil industry that began in the 70s, shortly after ANCSA was passed, resulted in generating much greater compensation to the without land shareholders than had been anticipated at the time the revenue sharing language in ANCSA was written. So despite not receiving land, the without shareholders did benefit greatly from the resource extraction revenues raised through the liquidation and depletion of oil and timber resources on lands held by the corporations that did receive land. For example, last year in 2020, the two annual dividend checks received by without land shareholders were approximately 4 times more than their village shareholder counterparts. The first one this year, 2021, was approximately 3 times more. In Senate Bill 3269, there is no acknowledgement of this monetary compensation provided by the revenue sharing agreement of ANCSA. Yet there can be no determination of equitable compensation, further equitable compensation, without an accounting of the compensation that was already received under ANCSA. Additionally, there seems to be no provision for the 5 new village corporations that would be created under this bill to pay into the ANCSA revenue sharing agreement, as did all the native corporations that were created by ANCSA originally. This would create an additional inequity because the new village shareholders would not be required to pay into the revenue sharing agreement they benefited from under ANCSA for 50 years. The corporations that the corporations that contributed into the ANCSA revenue sharing agreement through the liquidation and depletion of their natural resources of oil and timber surely deserve to be compensated in kind if any new corporations are to receive land. To be equitable, the new corporations created by this bill should be required to contribute to the 7I and 7J revenues under the same agreement as all the existing native corporations now follow under ANCSA. So an important question for the Senator Murkowski is, why aren't the new corporations that would be formed by S 3269 required to pay into the ANCSA 7I and 7J funds? There are over 100 additional villages in Alaska that did not qualify for corporation status under ANCSA back in the early 70s. Since this bill does not abide by the ANCSA criteria for village corporation eligibility, it will set a precedent for all Alaska. That means that all Alaska needs to participate in this discussion. For us here in Petersburg, the best approach, I believe, is to encourage this dialogue and going forward, just use as a guiding principle the principle of equity. And I think that's the best approach to move forward with this. And hopefully we can get some communication going with Senator Murkowski and be a back and forth question and answer discussion. So far, it hasn't been that way, but she needs to get on the ball.
Hey, Jensen, I'm gonna have to reboot these mics, I'm sorry. I'm crazy with that.
no lights. Does that mean it's working?
I think it is working. I think we're back on.
So did we ever get Mr. Beebe on the line?
Yes, we do. We also have another caller that was having a hard time getting in that has now gotten in. So we will let David Beebe speak.
Good.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
Hi. I'd like to speak to the, hold on, let me turn on the radio here. I'd like to speak to the landless legislation. And I would be the first one to start out by making sure that we understand that massive, massive injustices have taken place in the course of the history of statehood. And I'd like to just sort of circle back and put into context what this legislation will actually accomplish. And unfortunately, it will be a continuation of the same colonialism that it began with. And I think it's also important to understand that the coverage that we've so far heard has only referenced one point of view of an actual sociologist who was under the employ of the Sealaska Corporation to begin with. There are literally decades of sociological research dealing with the consequences, the negative consequences of ANCSA. And we have yet to hear even the existence of these decades of ethnologists and sociologists that have documented this. And I deeply, deeply regret that the media refuses to engage in anything other than legitimating what is clearly a direct conflict of interest. I'd also like to point out that, this was really an attempt by the Alaska Federation of Natives who believed that natives would have to become a part of the capitalist system in order to survive. As, by the way, I'm reading out of Wikipedia here. As stockholders in these corporations, the natives could earn some income and stay in their traditional villages. If the corporations were managed properly, they could make profits that would enable individuals to stay rather than having to leave native villages to find better work. This was intended to help preserve native culture. Well, history demonstrates through sociological research that it didn't work out well. And it's because it involves the colonial corporate capitalist model to begin with. And the shift in the strategy for this has been to suggest that utilizing carbon credits are going to be some measure of conservation, when in reality it is just another extension of the means of corporate capitalism to deal with the public perception of it acting responsibly. It hasn't, it won't, and it won't continue to under this system of denial and deception that the Sealaska Corporation has invested $500,000 in advancing. And I hope that the Assembly will appreciate all of these nuances of this narrative. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Beebe. Clerk Thompson, are there any other people wishing to speak under this item?
Yes, we will let John Haverlick speak next.
Good.
Hello, am I coming through?
Yes, you are.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry for being out of order in this. I tried the phone and I haven't had any luck. I guess I am as dumb as I look. But anyway, what I wanted to call about is hoping that you would extend the mask mandate. as of yesterday, we hit one of our highest numbers in the country of deaths and people that have gotten COVID. So we're still in the midst of this epidemic, and I'd like to see us continue to play it safe. I know with the last 3 big venues that we had over last month, our numbers just shot through the roof. So it's still very dangerous in our town, even though our numbers have gone down a bit. And I know it's uncomfortable to wear a mask. I played football for 3 years in high school and 4 years in college, and hated putting that uniform on. I got really claustrophobic. But after the game, I realized, God, I'm glad I had that uniform on. Also, if I went into surgery a couple times, and everyone in the surgery room had a mask on. No one got brain damage. In fact, they were very good at their jobs and helped me out a great deal. And I would have not wanted surgery if I walked in there or got rolled in there and no one had a mask on. Masks do save lives, and they help keep this infection down. So I would just hope that you would continue to keep this going on through the holidays, because people won't be sensible, as they've shown this last month. So please keep this going. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Haverlick. Clerk Thompson, are there other people in the queue?
Not that I know of. There are other people in the queue. I have sent messages and received no responses, so I'm going to assume that they are just listening.
So that brings us to items to be heard unrelated on today's agenda. Is there anybody that would like to speak to that item? Concerns unrelated to today's agenda? Nope. Okay, hopefully everybody got through that wanted to speak, but the assembly chambers are open to the public with masks. So board, commission, and committee reports, there are none. Consent agenda, we have 2 items on the consent agenda today, and it's approval of Keto's Cave Bar and Liquor Store liquor license renewal and the Loyal Order of the Moose liquor license renewal. I'd entertain a motion to approve both items on the consent agenda.
So moved.
There's a second.
Second.
Motion's been made with the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, clerk call the roll.
Thomas,
Yeah, I approve.
Jay,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Chelsea. Yes. Mark,
Yes. Okay, those applications are approved. Now it's time for a report of other officers. Today we have with us CEO from Petersburg Medical Center, Mr. Hofstetter. So will you please give us your update?
All right, good afternoon. Phil Hofstetter, Petersburg Medical Center CEO. Just a few things to mention. Our COVID situation, we've probably had, we did have our most serious outbreak in November, and we had over 230 community members with COVID. We had increase in severity. We had over 36 monoclonal antibody administrations. We've had significant numbers in our ER and significant numbers in our inpatient. And while those are coming down, we're still seeing some severity in our ER, and I'm sure Dr. DeCillo can speak to that if you have questions. In the last month, we also relied on FEMA workers. We had 4 nursing staff come in. We had emergency staff from public health come in to help with the outbreak, 3 staff. So that's 7 staff just to help with the outbreak. It's very difficult to manage the situation and also do day-to-day operations. So there's a significant burden on our staff that I really can't articulate how hard it is. And, you know, the expenditures from the hospital standpoint is really high to manage the COVID situation. Certainly we're providing, you know, testing for free and vaccinations and all the things that that go along with that. Our staff time are pretty, it's quite a burden. You know, I encourage long-term thinking on this. You know, we're talking about mitigation. We know mask work inside in buildings. You know, this is something that we've heard often that we have to live with. And so I encourage the assembly to think about those things in the long run and how we're going to mitigate and maintain our operations and maintain our economy as we go forward. I'm really glad to the state of Alaska for providing home kits. So that's really been a game changer as far as empowering the community members to test. Those antigen kits are very effective. However, we want to encourage, if there is a positive, that you don't just write it out. It's very important that you contact the hospital, call our hotline. Want to make sure that you get the treatment needed. We had a situation where, you know, somebody waited too long and they end up in the ER, and it's a little bit too late for the monoclonal antibody treatment, which you want to get in a short amount of time, a short window of time. Other things to report out, we went live with a new electronic health record last night at midnight. So that's a significant project. I can't tell you how proud of the staff, how hard they worked. That project is on par with a new facility. That's how intensive it is as far as change management, making sure that the system is built correctly and assessing risk. So, you know, it was pretty anticlimactic, which is great. So this week we have our Cerner, which is the vendor that we're using. We have Cerner staff here helping our staff, and they'll be here throughout the week. It's a pretty incredible feat, and you know, we're working through some gaps there and workflow issues. So be patient if you're coming to the hospital and there's some delays, or you can't get an appointment. There's going to be some of that extending out to this month. Board update. We had our board meeting last week, and I did reach out to Search, and our board wanted an invitation for Search to come in to provide a presentation. I reached out to leadership at Search, and the date tentatively, we're going to look at our March board meeting for Search to come in and provide a presentation. So that's encouraging. I'll provide more information as we have that, and certainly would like to make sure the public is aware of that in the assembly with that invite. We're still waiting on appropriations for funding with Murkowski. We're also looking at some of the infrastructure funding and how that trickles down into the state as far as opportunities for a new facility. And I want to thank Steve. He is attending our daily briefings in the morning every day as the COVID situation was evolving. So I think that's it. If you have any questions.
Questions for Mr. Hofstadter today? Member Lynn?
Yeah, if I, Phil, would you describe a little bit more? I think you were saying you're seeing a major change in the amount of intensity of work you're having to do with patients now with this latest outbreak as compared to where it was before. Could you put a little more meat on those bones, if you would, please?
Yeah, sure. So number one, the age is lower. Number two, we're seeing patients being more severely impacted in a longer time. So you know, somebody could have had COVID, they've gotten over the infection, all of a sudden they come into our ER and they're admitted. And so those are the kinds of situations that we're seeing. Dr. Sill is probably more appropriate to respond to some of those really specific nuances, but from a staffing standpoint, also our home health, you know, they do the aftercare and the follow-up. They've been instrumental in keeping people out of the hospital so they can go into homes and take care of people. And they had 15 COVID patients in November. I think they're down to 5 or so now. So it's good to have some follow-up there. But you know, the severity of the illness certainly is increased for sure. So again, Dr. Sill is more of a expert on some of those nuances if you'd like to hear from him.
Question from Hofstadter?
Thank you. Do you have a timeline on those FEMA workers, how much longer they're going to be here, or are they already gone?
We've asked to see if they can come throughout the end of December. So they've been very, very helpful. We're very appreciative of their work and they're excellent. So yeah, so hopefully we can get them longer, but I believe we have till the end of December. Yep.
Questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hofstadter.
You're welcome.
Now we will hear from Borough Health Officer, Dr. Tasillo.
If anybody doesn't know me, I'm Mark Tasillo. I'm Petersburg's public health officer at present. I think my function here is basically just to answer any questions you have. As I think you've heard from numerous sources, it's not always really great to be number one. Our incidence per 100,000 at one point in November was 3,000. Considering at that time Alaska was 500 and the country was 160. Just off the top of my head, because I worked this weekend, I didn't really tally things up, but I think we're down to 1,000 per 100,000 now. The state is down, I think, in the mid 1 to 200s, and the country was dropping, but I think it's coming back up again. But basically we're 5 to 10 times higher than the national average. So like I said, it's not really great to be number one. We know what the mitigation factors are that work. There's masks, there's immunizations. And as things change, we're now using the term physical distancing versus social distancing because of the stigma that's gone along with that. We have been remarkably lucky, or I guess I would say fortunate, because when I say we, I mean the hospital staff and the nursing staff primarily, have worked really, really hard to identify people early on, keep them out of the hospital, provide support for them and ongoing assessment at home. So even if somebody's not in the hospital and they lose 10 days of work, that's got a big economic impact for them. Right now, the last 2 meetings I was supposed to attend, I couldn't attend both times because I was taking care of COVID patients. The person I have in there now has been in there for 5 days and is hoping to go home. The downside of those home antigen tests, if there is one, is people can now know they're positive and then not declare it, which we've had happen twice. And then, as Mr. Hofstadter said, they come in late. They come in 10 days out. They're really sick. They're not a candidate for monoclonal antibody therapy. And in the interim, they're out there not masking, not mitigating at all, and probably potentiating the pandemic. The pandemic's not going to become an endemic until everything becomes dysynchronous. A little bit here, a little bit here. Things are going to pop up forever, just like common colds do. But right now, we are seeing a new wave. Whether the Omicron is going to make a big difference, I don't know. In the big scheme of things, it really doesn't matter, because if we don't do the things that we know work, the rest of it really is superficial. So if we don't have immunization rates that go up, if we don't have mask wearing and physical distancing practiced, we're going to continue to see intrinsic spread. Something that Mr. Hofstadter talked about as well is, how it affects the hospital, in addition to the long hours that the laboratory and the support staff is working. I mean, they're there till 10 o'clock at night running these things, so we know the results of tests the same day. But when that happens, we're not doing the normal things that we do. Health maintenance falls off, routine exams fall off, follow-up laboratories fall off. We are still in a red status, so we are curtailing discretionary testing and visits and imaging and things like that. And if you know anything about efficiency, for every hour or minute or time frame that you take and apply it to COVID or something else, you have to double that time because it's taking away from that hour or minute that you'd be doing something else. So, when you look at efficiency, every minute you spend costs you 2 minutes somewhere else. I, am not in this position to advise economic policy or punitive measures. I'm just here to answer questions and to advise the assembly. So, my mantra is get immunized, if wear a mask, physically distance, wash your hands. And if you get tested and you're positive, let somebody know so we can provide support. And that will cause you some degree of, isolation time, but it's the right thing to do for your community. Other than that, I'll answer any questions anybody has. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thanks for your report. Very informative. So later on this afternoon, we'll be talking about extending the mask mandate to
Right.
January 3rd. What's your recommendation or your thoughts on doing that?
Okay. So in a very basic sense, there is no medical or physical contraindication of wearing a mask. We know that masks cut down transmission. One mask somewhere between 1 and 3 times, or 1/3 transmission rate. If both people were wearing masks, probably 6 to 8 times decrease in transmission. I think masks are easy, they're safe, they're something that some people have to get used to. But trust me, we wear masks all the time, all day, and it's something you can accommodate yourself to, and it works.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was my question I was going to ask, but on a follow-up question, it seems like 36 doses of monoclonal antibodies for the size of our population is quite high. Is that because you guys are being very proactive, or is that normal?
Well, there's no normal. Monoclonal antibody is administered based on risk factors, not on acuity. Well, time frame. It's based on time frame if it's early, but it's not based on how sick you are. It's based on your risk factors before you get sick. If you're sick, the monoclonal antibody has come and gone. Then you're getting oxygen and steroids and fluids and maybe antiviral medicines, which are marginally effective at best. So there, like I said, there is a clear drop down of yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And if there's enough yeses, then you are a candidate for monoclonal antibody. And we try to administer it to you early before you get sick so you don't get sick. It basically transiently replaces what your body would produce long-term from an immunization.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm the phone number for people to call if they want to either start their vaccination process or to get the booster, and it's 772-5788.
Correct. That's the COVID hotline as it's been labeled.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering if you could speak to the vaccination rates in our community, if you've seen any uptick, in response to the recent outbreak and where we're at there.
I think as we've opened up each category above 18 to 12, 5 to 12, we've probably seen a marginal decrease in percentage available receiving the immunizations. We do get kind of little blips every time something happens. We're having immunization clinics twice a week, and I think public health has an additional 1 or 2 a week. So there is an ongoing trickle, and I think we're fully immunized about 70%. 68 to 70% right now is where our immunization rate is. And everybody talks about kind of the herd immunity factor, which there really is no such thing in nature. But herd immunity basically means that imperfect protection from immunizations decreases individual to individual spread to the point where you hopefully can extinguish that spread. For the person who gets the immunization, they're less likely by 90% to get acutely ill, and basically 99% less likely to end up in a hospital, and 99 0.9% less likely to end up on a ventilator, which is for the most part a terminal event. So it decreases your personal risk of becoming acutely ill or gravely ill. And it also, to some degree, decreases duration of your infectiousness and your ability to spread it to other people.
Thank you, Mr. Sill.
Yes, I'd just like to thank you personally and all the staff at the hospital, because I think the severity of this outbreak and your ability to minimize nobody dying, and I don't know how many people got seriously ill, but it seems like you guys have been doing a really good job at protecting us and keeping us healthy. So thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to take more credit for it, but it is not the doctors per se. It is our support staff that is just working their butts off, long hours and diligence and repetitive overlap checking, so there's no people falling through the cracks. They're the people that are really making a difference in this town.
I have a question. Since our peak of this last outbreak, when we were around 96 or whatever it was, and our numbers started coming down, what are our numbers currently? Do you have an update?
I think it's
since last Friday?
27. I think, again, I didn't check this morning, but we picked up 1, 2, I think 3 or 4 this weekend. And, they probably, a few more than that probably fell off at the same time. So if we have 27, that puts our incidence at about 1,000 per 100,000.
So we're right around in the low 20s, probably active cases now. That would,
Best guess without
okay.
some
So,
confirmation, yes.
all right, I guess we'll find out at 6 when we come out with the update. All right, thanks for your information today. If there's no other questions,
Okay, thank you.
thanks. Okay, now we have an update, and Mr. Cotta is going to give the update on the new fire truck, I believe. I was told before the meeting, so.
Hey, everybody hear me all right? I'm Chris Cotta, Public Works Director, and I'm going to give a brief update on the fire truck procurement process. The Fire Department Committee is close to finalizing the specs on the new engine number 5. The general configuration and function of the new engine will be similar to the department's other more modern engines. The approved budget for this unit is $650,000, and at present, the estimated cost of new engine 5 is $580,000, which includes a prepayment discount of $10,000. If we were to elect not to prepay in full, the cost would be approximately $590,000. Again, that's the estimate at this time. Specs for the unit are still being finalized, so the cost could change a little bit, although it should be close to that figure. A manufacturer's price increase is expected early next year, so we will probably bring this purchase to the assembly for approval at the first meeting in January. That's in brief what's happening right now. Does anybody have any questions?
Lynn?
Chris, how does the specs that you've come up with on this, how does that compare to where we are now? And what are the differences for our benefit?
Really, I think, and I haven't been involved in the committee process, so Sandy could jump in if I'm out of line here, but I think it's really just fine tuning the details of the truck. Nothing major is going to change at this point as far as, it's a 2-wheel drive, truck. It's not going to turn into a 4x4 truck. It's a regular pump truck. It's not going to turn into a ladder truck, next week. It's, what I mean? The changes are going to be minor. They're going to be, I think, mostly configuration things, pump outlets, SCBA support systems and things like that are the committee's fine tuning to make sure the truck best meets the mission of the department. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris. I had an opportunity to sit in with the officers on Saturday for a couple hours and went through, it had to have been 200 pages of specs for the fire truck. It was every detail from the tires all the way up to the ladder racks and from the front bumper to the back bumpers, talking about where the SCBAs go. It's a pretty basic fire truck. There's not a lot I think one of the things that I learned is that when they have to get a ladder off the truck in a tight situation, this new truck will be able to bring the ladder down without having it end up in the ditch somewhere on a tight space. And yeah, they're very diligent. It was a real worthwhile experience for me to sit there and listen to them go over every detail on that truck, from the lighting that goes forward to lighting and the camera system in the back, the lights that come down on the side so that the firefighters and supports group can see what they're doing. Yeah, didn't appear to me there were any bells and whistles on the fire truck. It was just, this will be a long overdue replacement. And like Director Cotta said, the price increase goes up on January 14th. So I would expect to see some type of action by either the city manager or Chris for action for us sometime in early January. So yeah, thanks a lot for the report.
Any other questions on the new fire truck procurement? Okay, Mr. Cotta, you also are going to give us an update on the baler.
Yes, I'm going to give some updates on the baler itself and also our operations, the sanitation department. So first on the new baler, this new machine was installed in October 2019, so we've been operating it for a little over 2 years. Overall, the new equipment has been a huge improvement over the original baler, which had reached the end of its service life and was no longer functioning reliably. Our sanitation crew is doing a great job keeping up on routine maintenance of the new equipment. The machinery is cleaned daily and lubed as needed. Periodic maintenance schedules are being followed closely in order to maximize reliability and service life of the equipment. We have had a couple intermittent issues with the controls that required visits from service personnel based outside of Petersburg. The first such issue occurred within the 1-year warranty period and was covered by the manufacturer. We had another control issue this year, which required service by factory trained personnel. Although this issue was not covered by warranty, we were able to resolve it without any significant effects to solid waste operations. As discussed prior to purchase of the new machine, we have included the eventual replacement of this baler in the borough's motor pool fund and have been paying into this fund annually as we do with other equipment like garbage trucks. The new baler has a projected service life of 20 years. We hope to exceed that anticipated service life, but we'll be ready to replace the machine at the 20-year mark if needed. In summary, the new equipment is fulfilling its mission to compact and bale the borough's waste and recyclables for shipment south. And we anticipate it will be a vital part of our operations for many years to come. And then on the operational side of the sanitation department, some changes are coming up after the holidays. We will be transitioning our commingled recycling program to every other week pickup instead of weekly as at present. This was, a change that was incorporated into the new sanitation code that was recently approved. And this change will be advertised well in advance so customers know what to expect and have some time to plan for the transition. Another change that is coming up early next year will be the transition away from our 1.5 and 3 yard metal dumpsters that are still in service. We've got approximately 25 or 30 of those still out there, all of them in poor condition for the most part. So the change transitioning away from those will occur in conjunction with the changes to the recycling pickup schedule. Once we transition to every other week recycling pickups, we will be retiring our rear loading garbage truck from active service. And that is the only truck that is configured to pick up these dumpsters. So once we retire that truck and make it a reserve vehicle, we won't be out, won't have an active truck that's configured properly to pick those up. So we'll be working between now and that point of transition to eliminate those remaining dumpsters from our fleet and replace them with 300-gallon plastic carts. Customers with big projects who need larger containers will also be able to request one of the borough's new 14-yard roll-off dumpsters. We've got 2 of those available for those bigger customers. We've been asked if public access hours at the baling facility and landfill are going to change with any of these upcoming operational changes. We don't have any plans to change our hours at this time. The reduction in the number of weekly recycling routes collected will free up some staff time that will be used to perform maintenance on the baling facility grounds, buildings, and equipment. If after making these changes, we see an opportunity to increase public access hours, we will certainly give that some consideration and report on that as well. So that is a brief update on what's happening with the new baler and our sanitation operations. And I'll be happy to address any questions you guys have.
Okay, thank you for your presentation today and your update on the baler. That brings us to the mayor's report. Alaska natives without land legislation. We'll be talking about that later in the meeting as a discussion item. There was a couple emails asking that we have it as an action item. I thought a couple weeks for people to digest it and see if the legislation's changed and the maps have changed would give us some time. So potentially in the discussion later today, maybe we'll decide to move it on to an action item. And we had a Zoom meeting with Sea Alaska, I believe it was Monday. Myself, Manager Giesbrecht, Community and Economic Director Cabrera, and PIA Administrator Tracy Welch took part in the meeting with the Sea Alaska board members. And we discussed Petersburg's priorities for projects and partnership opportunities. And I thought I'd ask Liz to give us a little update on some of the potential partnerships and programs that Sea Alaska provides.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. The Sea Alaska provided a kind of a 4-page outline of programs and projects that they do. Sea Alaska has 250 shareholders in Petersburg. Their upcoming business focus has transitioned from timber, and they're quite focused on ocean health moving forward. Most recently, they've invested in 2 Icelandic seafood companies to further their portfolio in that area. They're involved in a number of nonprofit organizations and projects throughout the region, notably the Southeast Alaska Sustainable Partnership, which is a network of communities, nonprofits, and businesses focused on developing partnerships and identifying funding sources and opportunities to meet communities' broad-based goals. There are currently 7 municipalities who are partners within that network, and they certainly advocated some of the or pointed out some of the successes of that partnership. They've recently endowed a $10 million fund for investment in traditional languages. They expect to generate about $500,000 in grants each year from that to revitalize Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian languages in the region. Their goal for this year is also to seek additional engagement with community leaders, and they plan to hold additional meetings over the coming 18 months with communities throughout the region. They recently hired a workforce development specialist, and they've got a pilot project focused on Prince of Wales, primarily around natural resource-based industry and focused on youth employment possibilities. Based on the outcomes of that, they're going to be looking at expanding that program. I think most people are aware of the Sea Alaska Heritage Institute. That's been around since the 1980s, and there's been a number of projects funded through that program throughout the region. Sea Alaska was instrumental in the foundation of Spruce Root, which is a community development financial institute that's chartered by the federal government. They provide loans and business coaching, and they're the ones that sponsor the Path to Prosperity competition each year. There's a number of Petersburg-based businesses who have received services from them over the years, both loans and grants. Most notably, the Salty Pantry was the winner of the 2015 Pathway to Prosperity contest, and that really helped launch that business. Also, PIA was part of the Food Catalyst program that they ran last year, and Tracy Welch was a Food Catalyst ambassador. And you probably heard about the food preservation workshops they did the last few months. Overall, they have a broad range of programs and initiatives that they're running, and they certainly were trying to see where they could support Petersburg in some of our projects and where there was opportunities for partnerships, and encouraged ongoing communication.
Thanks, Liz, for giving a more detailed explanation of that than I could have. But it was interesting. It was probably a 45-minute long Zoom meeting, and all of their board members were there. So if there's any questions or if you need to get a hold of any contact information, Liz probably has that, or the right people. So the borough is seeking letters of interest, and we're accepting letters from citizens to serve the community by filling one of the vacant seats on the following board and commissions until October 2022 municipal election. Planning Commission, there are 2 vacant seats. Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, there are 2 vacant seats. And there's 1 on the Public Safety Advisory Board, but we have someone that expressed interest. So with the approval of the assembly later, we will make that appointment. And letters of interest should be sent to Clerk Thompson at the borough offices located at 12 South Nordic Drive, or by sending a letter to Post Office Box 329, Petersburg, 99833, or by emailing dthompson@petersburgak.gov. I will be traveling over the next 2 meetings. I'll definitely be able to call in on the 3rd, but the meeting on the 20th will be at a 3-hour later time zone, so it might be 9 o'clock at night. I might still be awake. I'll contact the clerk in advance and let her know if I'll be available. So that's it for the mayor's report. It's now time for the manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As is customary, Public Works is offering a limited amount of traction sand for borough residents to use on their walks and driveways. Up to 10 buckets of sand per residence may be obtained at no cost from Public Works during regular business hours from 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. Anyone wanting to obtain sand through this program should bring their own shovel and buckets and check in with the front desk before loading any sand. Continue to work with FEMA to facilitate repairs to the failed drainage culvert at the Public Works yard. Design of the project is largely complete, and we plan on bidding the project out this winter to begin construction in May for next year as per the requirements of the ADF&G permit. The repair work on the motor pool shop is nearing substantial completion. We anticipate performing a pre-final inspection this week and generating a punch list for any remaining construction items. The youth basketball program was canceled at Parks and Rec due to the amount of time that we needed to finish the season. We put it on postponement during our COVID outbreak. We would have continued it, it would have extended too far into the busy holiday times. Please contact Parks and Rec regarding a refund if you've not already done so. Parks and Rec is busy planning their holiday winter wonderland event on December 18th from 4 to 6. Please contact Julie Anderson if you'd like to volunteer. We're also looking for lifeguards, and we're hosting another lifeguard certification course from January 7th through the 9th. Please contact Scott Burt for more information and to get registered as soon as possible. During the recent PMEA negotiations, the borough heard employees were uneasy about having to fill out and sign a timesheet prior to the end of a pay period. To solve this issue, the borough is in the process of changing our pay period dates, beginning with the first pay period in January. All pay days will remain the same on or before the 5th and 20th of each month. This is something we discussed and agreed to in negotiations, and we want to make sure we keep our word. Jody's applied for the Alaska Department of Commerce, Community and Economic Development for the local government Lost Revenue Relief Program. That's a mouthful. A resolution of support will be presented to the Assembly at the December 20th meeting. This funding opportunity is available to Alaska local governments and has a deadline for the resolution to be approved by December 31st, 2021. Passport services at the library are scheduled to resume Tuesday, December 7th. And the library is hosting a retrospective exhibit of the ceramic works of Polly Lee. The exhibit can be seen on the library's YouTube channel, which you can get from off the library website or talk to them directly. The library has received 2 American Rescue Plan grants from the Alaska State Library an easy grant for $6,000 for janitorial service and collections, and a project grant for $39,661 to partner with KFSK and the Petersburg Indigenous Awareness Committee to produce radio podcasts. Program is scheduled to launch early in 2022. Rock and Rogue finished up the Ira 2 street sewer project by the project deadline. Final inspection of all work has been difficult to arrange due to the snowy weather, but a warm, rainy window of opportunity could bring our last chance before spring. And saw them out there looking at it. I'm not sure if they finished all the walkthrough. Alaska Municipal League is helping to organize a group of its members impacted by the 301H Clean Water Act waiver and wastewater discharge permitting issues. Petersburg will participate in that effort and keep the assembly informed on progress. Power and Light was informed that ADOT is not going to move forward with installation of any streetlights on Papke's Landing Road. Their issue was budgetary, as they didn't have that planned. Carl will be working with McMillan Jacobs to amend their professional services contract to include the next phases of engineering, permitting, and equipment manufacturer oversight for the Blind Slough Hydro project. All bonds and insurance have been received from Giltz Hydro to move forward with equipment manufacturer for the Blind Slough project. Kickoff meeting will occur early in December to get things started. Kudos to Public Works and the Power and Light line crew on their work to find, place, and decorate the community Christmas tree. And again, huge thanks to Matt Briner for his work on the lights, both at the library and our tree here at the municipal building. Due to staffing issues out of our control, Sue Flannery has extended her career by one more month. Her final day will now be December 31st. We thank her for being flexible and for supporting her department past her planned retirement date. Battery backup for the new 911 system was identified as old and needed to be replaced during the installation of the new system. We believe the battery backup failed last week during the monthly generator test at the fire hall. 2 new backups have been ordered and are in transit to Petersburg, and they were paid for through the E911 fund. Barb Beasley completed her crime scene technology and evidence collection training through SIR CHIE. This training will assist the police department with crime scene processing, documentation, and prosecution. Petersburg Police Department's policy and procedures manual is being updated and reviewed. This also includes the Petersburg jail policy and procedures. Thank you to harbor users for paying attention to their vessels, especially during stormy and rainy weather. Please continue to let the harbor office know if you plan on being out of town and provide us with your boat watching contact information. Harbor staff has been meeting with Corps of Engineers concerning the status of the dredge sampling. The results have been turned over to EPA for their 45-day comment period. Scheduling for bidding out the project is on schedule with the bid opening in April, bid award in June, and a project start date of October 1st, 2022. The large crane is finished. Unit is being prepped to ship back for install, hopefully good for another 34 years. And last is visitation is open at assisted living. Visitors must wear masks and not be symptomatic, or they will not be allowed to visit. That's it.
Manager Giesbrecht, are there any questions? Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to Steve. Can you just give me an update on where we are with this Papke's snowplow contract? If that's been let? Or
Say that again, I'm sorry.
The Papke's snow plowing contract? Are we?
I believe it's in place. Same vendor we used the last 2 years. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the manager on his report? Okay, seeing none, that moves us on to item 14, unfinished business. And only one item under unfinished business today, and it's ordinance 2021-18. This is an ordinance updating various provisions of chapter 14.16 of the municipal code entitled Electric Utility and including electric rate and connection cost increases. This is the second reading, and we also had a public hearing on this today. So we've got that taken care of. I'd entertain a motion to approve this ordinance in its second reading.
So move. Second.
Motion's been made by member Mucci, seconded by member Lim. Any discussion on this ordinance? This ordinance is also was on the ballot to move forward with the bonding for this project. So member Lim.
Yeah, I have, Carl provided some pretty good notes to us that answer some of the questions. My concern that I talked about last time had to do with, and still does have to do with, what happens if there is an extended outage where we're on diesel burn for a long period of time outside of the normal SEPA downtime. There's nothing in this proposed ordinance that would addresses that. And if you go back a couple of years where we were on an extended period for more than a month or so when SEPA was out, that I really do think that, and Carl has a recommendation, I believe, in here for us, that he could draft language that would include it, could be included on the third reading that would address this issue, that I think would help. We may never need it, but at least it's there and we don't have to go back and the future assembly doesn't have to go back and readdress it.
Mr. Hagerman, I see you on the screen. Did you want to have some input? Maybe to give us a little update on your proposal? And it sounds like it would add good language to this ordinance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, the issue that Member Lynn discussed is mentioned in my memo to the Assembly. And he did bring up a good point that we do plan in our budget on an annual basis for the 10-day maintenance shutdown that SEPA holds. And so we budget for the fuel that we're burning in that period of time. But if there were other issues such as running diesel generation in support of winter loads called peak shaving, or if there were additional difficulties with SEPA transmission lines that forced us to run our diesels in support of SEPA or to supplant SEPA in general if the transmission lines failed, there's no mechanism in place for the utility to recoup the higher costs to generate that we see when we run our diesel units. So the point that Member Lim makes, I think, is valid. We may never use such an ordinance provision to recoup costs of diesel generation, or we could use it next month. It's really unknown how soon or when that might come into place, but having such a provision in the ordinance, it might be timely, a good time to include that. And I can certainly add some language that just allows the utility to make an adjustment to user rates based on increased costs of generation if it occurs.
Okay, thank you for that heads up there, Carl. So Member Lynn, was that something you intended to potentially make as an amendment in the third reading?
Yes, I would. Do you want a motion to that effect, Mr. Mayor?
Well, we'd have to make a motion to amend the ordinance, I believe, when we'd add language.
Yeah,
If we're ready, if we have the language that Mr. Hagerman has put forward, I would like to have time to read it and digest it a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hagerman, but I don't think that language is drafted yet. We'd have to see it on the next reading, then we could make the amendment. I agree with you on need to read it, et cetera.
well, yeah, if we could get that information presented to us, so, well, it'll be in the packet. So, it could be in the packet, I guess. So, anyway, if there's no other discussion on ordinance 2021-18, I'd entertain a motion, or I'd call for the vote. If there's no other discussion, I don't see any hands going up.
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Bob.
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 2021-18 passes unanimously in its second reading. And now we're on to new business. And the first item under new business is ordinance 2021-21. This is an emergency ordinance continuing a public health and safety measure requirement of face coverings in indoor public settings to address current community COVID-19 outbreak. One and only reading. This is the emergency ordinance. So, and we did have a public hearing on this earlier. I'd entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 2021-21.
So move. Second.
Motion's been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Kinsinger. Any discussion? Member Kinsinger.
Yes, I think we should pass this ordinance. As I've stated in previous meetings, this isn't an ordinance to wear a mask. When you walk out of your house, you do not have to wear a mask. The only time that we're asking you to wear a mask is if you go into a shared inside commercial space, however you want to define it, where other people are present. That's all we're asking you to do. If all the businesses in town have agreed to deliver products to people. They have offered to deliver products outside of their establishments to people on the curb. So with the exception of the post office, there's really no place in town that you cannot get what you need. So all we're asking people to do with this ordinance is just not wear a mask inside. We're not asking you, you're not forced to wear a mask. If you have mental health issues, if you have health issues that require you that you can't put one on. And I'm going to support this because I think Dr. Trusillo made a pretty compelling comments about why we need to have this ordinance in place. The effectiveness of masks were not 100% causing us to make COVID go away, but it helps. And from our numbers, we obviously need all the help we can get. So I think we should pass this.
Any other discussion on ordinance 2021-21?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Member Tremblay. And then, is that you?
Yeah, it's me.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead first? Sorry, Chelsea.
Okay, thank you. No, I just echo pretty much all the comments by Dr. T earlier. I think this is an important part of moving forward. We're not out of this thing yet. It seems like a common sense safety move, and on the assembly, I think it's our obligation to continue this for another month. So I'll be voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Stanton Gregor. Member Tremblay.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important that we pass this. It's very exciting news that our cases are declining, but unfortunately we are in a plateau state that we were in before the big spike, and then behavior of the community enabled that to happen. And as we heard, a lot of people got sick and a lot of work had to go into getting us back to the state that we're in right now. And given the state of town economics, we need to be able to keep things moving smoothly. I would like to have a local government that can both plow roads and pick up garbage at the same time. So I believe that keeping smart public health measures in place right now is incredibly important. I do recognize it's not that popular for some people, that people would prefer to host events and not have to deal with this. We're the ones that the responsibility stops with. And so I think that us asking them to continue to behave in smart ways, you can be mad, but blame us and put the right measures in place for your event, because it's really, really important that we keep it together. So that's my thought on that. I'll be voting yes.
Any other discussion on this ordinance? Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The current ordinance expires tonight at midnight, and this one will go till January 3rd, 2022 at midnight. I support this. I get the lucky task of picking up mail at the post office a couple times a week for my family, and every hour I wait up there, for the most part, people are wearing masks, and I think that's for me, that's the biggest health concern we have is the post office. But I think this is just good health practices, as we heard from Dr. Trusillo earlier. Anything we can do to, keep us all safe and keep the numbers down is a good idea. I'm looking forward to January 4th when this thing goes away, so that we can, get on to other things. But I think it's a prudent thing to have in place until January 3rd, 2020. So I'll be voting in favor of it. Thank you.
Discussion on this ordinance. Well, I'm going to probably not support this ordinance. It's not that I don't support masking, it's just mandating that you wear the mask. And we've had this discussion a meeting or two ago where we were talking about fine structures, and that wasn't passed, and I'm glad it wasn't. That caused a lot of division in the community. I think the people that are gonna wear the mask will wear them without a mandate. I wear mine personally when I go into, public spaces. But even wearing them for an extended period of time, like right now in this meeting, I have a hard time catching my breath all the time, but I'm wearing it. So that's my position on this mandate. Any other discussion or input? Clerk, call the roll.
Jay,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Mark,
No.
David,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Okay, emergency ordinance 2021-21 passes with a 6-1 vote with Mayor Jensen opposed. That brings us to capital projects. Manager Giesbrecht requests the assembly amend and or approve Petersburg Borough's capital project list, including the order of priority. This will be going to the state of Alaska for the legislative session of 2023, and this will then be entered in their CAPSIS program. And whether there's any money or not, we need to have a few projects on the list. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the list as presented.
So-
And then we'll go through changes if there are any.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made to accept the capital projects list presented to us by Manager Giesbrecht.
Mayor,
Discussion.
if I just could inject something, in your packet, you didn't have the priority sheet. It was a different tab and it didn't get printed. So I did put that all in front of you. So there's 4 projects that you didn't see in your packet, but you have in front of you on a spreadsheet. So anyway, yes, sir, the short list.
Short list.
Here, I'll walk around.
Okay, the one with,
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir. All right, so those were not in, that one was not in.
hey, any discussion on this? Is everybody okay with the priority? Member Lynn?
I have I have a number of questions. First, Manager, you have down there on the other priority, the 4 items, the Scal Bay haul out and wash down pad for 7.2 million. And then over on the other list is the Scal Bay Boat Harbor for 62 million. They're totally separate.
Yes, sir.
And that is, and then on that Scal Bay Boat Harbor is actually the figure 62 million.
It's our best estimate at this point. This is a project that would be create a breakwater and a harbor basin there and then put in the floats. Trying to think of Glow and group. We'll try to go through all the details, but at this stage, it's a guess. I mean, I hate to say it that way. She's gone back to P&D to say, on their initial engineering documents that they did, how close are those? This was all prior to COVID. So that's the best we can get as far as a number for right now.
Thank you on that.
On that topic, of that discussion with the breakwater and the harbor actually being developed at Scal Bay, wasn't there potential or talk about potentially housing a Coast Guard vessel or 2 in there?
Yes, sir. That's exactly
That's part of
why.
the discussion.
And this got added to the list. It's been one of those, dream type things for a long time. But we had an interesting call with the Corps of Engineers who basically got a whole bunch of money with these infrastructure grants and actually reached out to us to say, hey, does Petersburg have any more projects? Because they've got a whole bunch of money. So we ran this by them and they said, yeah, we might be able to help with that. Granted, they're not putting the floats in or anything like that. That's putting a harbor basin in. But that's, a whole bunch of millions of dollars to do all that. So Glow wanted to get it on the list as far as just a placeholder for anything else, and allows us to keep having that conversation with the Corps. And, we'll know more later as they're going to actually take a look at it and see if it fits any of their programs.
Yes, I think we need to aggressively move on the Coast Guard option for several reasons. One, it's very important that we keep the Coast Guard presence in the community. And if we are able to secure one of the new generation of weed tenders, it would be as many as 25 to 30 new Coast Guard positions in the community. And I want to emphasize, this is not the enforcement side of the Coast Guard, but these are the guys that go out and take care of the buoys that we all rely upon and that I rely upon every day when I go home.
Remember Lynn?
Back to the same one, which, and I asked the harbor master the question. I think she answered me, but I haven't had a chance to read it. Is there a reason to put that as number 3 priority over all the other, the maintenance of our existing facilities? I was trying to understand why that went to the number 3 priority versus down the list, or at least being on there someplace.
Sure, I can kind of speak to it. And that's number 3 on the harbor list, not 3 overall. The assembly has to weigh in on overall stuff. And I think a lot of it has to do with the Coast Guard. I mean, it's, and the potential availability of funding. So when the Corps jumps in and says, hey, we got a whole bunch of money to spend, we want to make sure that if in fact we have a project, it's rated high enough that the Corps is going to say, oh, wow, it's important to Petersburg. So that adds value to it. So I think there's a lot of that. I mean, I think Lo said it well in her response to you, which was really it's about getting it on the list and then go from there. But, the harbor folks decided that was their 3rd most important thing. And, I don't think it's gone farther than that other than just a conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think the harbor lists are very important to the community. That 62 million number, I don't think that should frighten anybody. I think it's very important to remember that that's where our future is going to be, is out at Scow Bay. And we need to be able to tell our federal lobbyists and legislators that, yeah, we're looking for a home for the Coast Guard out there. And I think I've heard many conversations with folks wanting to know, how come our harbors do so well and they look so great? And a lot of it has to do with the staff at the harbor department who are looking for projects and trying to plan for the future after they're retired and gone. And these projects here will get us into the future. That I think there's a lot of stuff to be planned out at the Scow Bay Boat Harbor. I don't think we're even close to deciding what we have to do. I think there's fire halls that need to be moved and this, that, the other, but there's a lot of discussion that has to go on. And I think it needs to be a priority for the harbors and for all of our lists that we're putting together, that, yeah, we're actively looking at how we can be welcoming to other entities in Petersburg. So yeah, I think it's a good list. Thank you.
So Manager Giesbrecht, the short list with 4 items on it, it's going to go to the state legislature. Does this whole list get sent to the legislature as well, with these 4 kind of being our priority, and this also goes to our federal delegation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it's not only going to go to the state legislature, it will also go to the federal.
Yes, sir.
office and delegation.
If I may add, I mean, just recently we had kind of one of the fire drill things that happens with this list where our Juneau lobbyist called me and said, I've got an hour to give the governor's office your top priority projects, but they need to be like this. They can't be something that you're going to get funding from another place. And so I sent them some projects. They're not necessarily what's on their priority list. So, I can go back and change that. But the governor's office was asking for very specific things. So what ended up on that list going to our lobbyist, that I'm assuming is in the hands of the governor's office, was Papke's, the Aquatic Center rebuild, Petersburg Medical Center, Scow Bay, and the Blind Slough Hydro. Okay. I don't think we're getting any money out of that phone call. But that being said, I wanted to be open about what I did and why I did it. The direction was, it needed to be something very specific, and they wanted an answer right then. So that's what went to the governor's office. We can clearly tell our lobbyists something different, and that's what this list will do, is when the assembly decides what shows up where, all of this gets entered into CAPSIS, and all of this goes to the legislature.
Was he asking for that because of the deadline for the governor's capital budget?
It might have been, sir.
15th or something?
Well, he was taken aback a little bit. He didn't really understand what the governor's office was asking. And they called him and said, "Are you still representing Ketchikan and Petersburg?" And he said, "Yeah, give me some projects, quick." And he called me and said, like last year, for example, we did this in February. So I wasn't ready to answer that question then, but might as well get it done, I suppose. And I did give him that answer for those projects I just listed.
So what were the three that you mentioned to Ray over the phone? Papke's was one of them?
The five that I gave him were Papke's, the Aquatic Center refurbishment, Petersburg Medical Center, Scow Bay, and Blind Slough.
The hydro, okay.
The
and
hydro,
Street
yes.
paving that's on this list was not part of that conversation.
So again, I apologize for it being confusing. Unfortunately, this is how this happens sometimes.
No, well, you gotta do what you gotta do. Member Kinsinger.
Yes, Steve, that pretty much lines up with what we set as our priorities last February, correct?
Parts of it do, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the Aquatic Center wasn't on there.
That's the only one that wasn't on that list. Okay, thank you.
Member Lynn?
Yes, if I could, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to add one more project to the list, and that would be under the, what I'll find it, Petersburg Medical Center, and that would be, I'll call it environmental engineering for $100,000. And what that would be for would be to do all the necessary preliminary engineering on a site that we might pick sometime later. And the reason I would go there is for a different reason, is that as part of this infrastructure bill, the Denali Commission has received a significant amount of money. I don't know offhand, I don't remember offhand how it is. If we were to put this on our list, and if the medical center was willing, it would put that on their list, we may have a chance to pick up the money we need to do the environmental engineering. So I would move to add that particular project to the list.
And to the amount of $100,000.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it for
Okay, for the
discussion.
sake of discussion, didn't we vote and approve expenditure of money for the Petersburg Medical Center to get the land if they select it? And we give them the land to project ready? I mean, utilities and geotechnical and.
I can speak to some. So the project that is currently on this, and it was a priority for the assembly last year. It's got the title of Petersburg Medical Center renovation or replacement, get to construction ready status. That includes the environmental. It's a price tag of about 16.2 million. That includes that, if I'm got it right, Phil. And we hope that there's 8 million coming from Senator Murkowski. I did not put that in as funding already secured because Phil doesn't have it in hand. But that 16 million is that.
Okay,
process.
if that isn't, I'll withdraw my motion.
Yeah, that it's built into that. And Phil, please jump up and correct if I say any of this wrong.
We on the right track, Mr. Hofstadter?
Yeah, I guess it would be included. Member Lynn was alluding to is that some of the lower the site work, it would be included in that. Yes, it would be part of that equation. I think one of the unanswered questions that come out in the community is where the site selection, the engineering may be part of that, but yes, absolutely, it would be part of that, that funding. Is that?
Okay, all right, thank you for
Yeah.
the clarification.
By the way, I mean, you can break that up any way you want. I mean, yeah, that's what was there last year, and I don't remove things from the priority list unless the assembly chooses that.
You're asking a good question, Manager. To ask Mr. Hofstadter that, would it be helpful if that got broken up into several parts in terms of your, what would help you and your grant funding?
Okay, Member Lynn, do you want to keep the motion on the floor?
Okay, I'll keep yes, I'll keep the motion on the floor, and as I understand it, that then we could reduce that, was it 16 million, I believe, Steve, in there by 100,000 and just list it as a separate item.
Okay.
Any other discussion on this, motion? So basically, Member Lynn, what you're intending to do with this is just, well, ask for funding for $100,000 to start the site prep when we decide what site,
Exactly.
and maybe this would help decide site due to muskeg gups, et cetera.
Yes, and I think it would also help Mr. Hofstadter I believe, in looking for grant funding too, if we can say we have a match, if he goes to the Denali Commission or anyplace else.
Okay, so that will be added to the state request list?
Let me repeat, so I make sure I've got it
Sure,
right.
yeah.
Sorry, so I would reduce the 16.2 that's already there to 16.1. I'd put another item that's basically site selection for 100,000. The match piece, Phil's correct. It's always good to have a match. I'm not exactly sure how to put a match in because we don't know what property they're ready to choose yet.
Right, I
So-
didn't mean for us to put a match in,
all
I
right.
just
So-
show it separately.
So at this point, I'd put nothing as funding already secured. So it'd be adding another item, that's the site selection for PMC, $100,000, and then reducing the 16.2 to 16.1 on what's
Keeps
already
the
there.
request amount at the same level. So, and whether who knows if we'll get any. So, Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to follow along here. So there'll be no work done for a site selection for a future expansion or new hospital until we get that 100,000, or? I'm just trying
Can't
to,
speak to that.
okay.
We're just looking, I guess, Member Lynn's, and maybe his intention was to ask for $100,000 if that's what we need to get this moving down that direction instead of asking for 16.2 million. I'm not sure,
Yeah,
Member Lynn?
yeah, this would be an upfront, this is one of those really upfront costs that once we agree on and this is going to be done hopefully next year. Once we agree on a site, then we need, the first step is to look at, what is needed there, what's the environmental factors we got to deal with, et cetera. And that's what this would be, is kind of the upfront cost. Does that answer your question, Member Mucci?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Member Trimley?
Thank you. I can feel us sifting through the weeds on this, and I'm appreciating it a lot. I see this as an attempt at moving the process along faster as we wait for that 8 million that is supposed to be coming from the federal government. And so I guess I'll be voting yes, I think, because anything that can help us move along faster is good. I do know that we're anticipating that funding, but it is a big question about when it actually will be materially arriving. I'm staring at Dr. Hofstadter as we have this conversation. Do you want to go to the microphone and elaborate on this? Because if we're making it more complicated than necessary.
I
yeah.
don't mean to make this more complicated.
No.
I wasn't prepared and I apologize. So the idea is really just to move it along. It's exactly right. And it's not to replace the funding. It's to, there's two ideas behind this. One is that the community has really, when this came up, unintentionally, over the summer, I think the community's response was like, there was a pretty strong response on where the sites was selection. And it seems like we need to answer that question regardless. We need, a facility, we need to be able to do this. How we pay for it is certainly, up in the air as far as appropriations and federal funding. But to get to that answer, to move the ball along is just, you can incrementally do it with some funding. And so that's one part of it. The second part of it is when you're asking for funding, it looks better, certainly, when you have on the application that your assembly is supporting, the borough supporting this through some match funding. And it's not a ton of money, but it's some funding that it's an impression, it's a designation that, hey, we're serious about this, we support this, we want to put this on the grant application. It could be Denali Commission, it could be some other USDA grant application. And the idea is really to kind of to build support behind the project and to move it along at the same time, but also to try to answer those questions of where we should build, you know, because obviously, you know, I heard loud and clear that there's a lot of really strong opinions behind that. And so I think, you know, I thought we did a pretty good job on that in the master planning when it was supported before, but clearly we have a little bit of work to do on that. So the idea is to get the ball moving down the court if we can. I don't mean to make it confusing. I certainly apologize for even bringing this up. You know, and you know, again, it's not to replace the funding. It's just to keep the ball moving forward if we can.
And if I may add, is Carl still on there? If not, but it's okay.
Yes, he is.
Okay, so Carl may want to jump in. One of the challenges with site selection, particularly around here, is it depends on where utilities are and how deep the muskeg is. So, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm not sure $100,000 will do it. I mean, because part of it is you've got to do an environmental assessment to say, or not an environmental, an assessment that says, okay, you know, what kind of road work is going to be necessary if you pick that site as compared to another one? What kind of utilities are necessary one site versus another? What kind of, you know, muskeg, you know, site preparation is going to be needed at one site versus another? In other words, one particular site might be cheaper for a road, but a lot more expensive for putting utilities in. That whole analysis, Carl, you have any clue how much that would cost? I mean, of course, it depends on how many sites you choose to look at, but.
Mr. Mayor, through the mayor, no, that's a really good question. And I don't have any data as far as how much that effort might be. I think there's a fair amount of rough estimating that we could do in-house in the borough. Again, it really depends on each site and a little bit more information about how deep the muskeg is and, you know, what it would take to extend underground utilities to that site. So there's probably some rough estimating that could be done. But having a professional engineer come and take a look at it is probably best for the borough and the hospital. And that effort, unknown as how much a consultant might want for that effort.
Thank you, Carl and Manager Giesbrecht. And it seems like we always make this grant application, this projects list application more confusing than it needs to be. You know, I mean, first, you just submit it and you hope you get some money, but whether we'll get any money or not, it doesn't matter. But I like the way we're going to break this down, and maybe the state would come through with some funding for this. And then if we get a match from a granting agency, that would, you know, get us 1 foot forward, I guess. So anyway, that's my opinion. Any other discussion? Are we going to decide how we're going to prioritize this, or are we going to leave it as it is, with paving being one? This is this prioritized, Manager Giesbrecht?
The long list that says additional capital project requests are prioritized within
their
department. The one sheet that you have a hard copy only is basically, you know, that should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many you want on there. That should be very specific on what you think is the most important stuff. You know, again, this is from last year, so you can ignore the dates on it. This is what you guys did last year. Does not include the aquatic center, does not include hydro, and does not include PAPPs, which there's been subsequent conversations throughout the year on those things. You know, I added them to this report, did not add them to the priority list. That's up to the assembly.
Okay, any thoughts? Do we vote on this as presented, or do we want to put numbers on it? And my experience has been, you know, it depends on if the state's funding, what they're funding. You know, are they funding hospitals, or are they funding harbors, or are they schools, or so I don't know if we need to prioritize this or not. Do we want to add the hydro to it? It's got to be hydro, or just throwing ideas out there so we can keep moving forward. Member Kensinger.
I don't think we need to number it. I agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I think we should just submit the list.
And we could deal with as the legislature unfolds, and if we hear from our senator or representative or lobbyist that there's potential money for this, we can always, put in a future request, I would think. So if there's no other input, we have to vote to add, we're gonna vote on this and with PAPKEys in it. So I don't think we need to have a separate amendment to add PAPKEys to the list. So, if there's no other discussion, will the clerk call the roll?
What exactly am I calling the roll on? I apologize.
To vote if this is the list we're sending to the legislature,
Must be on the
correct?
amendment.
Without adding anything else to the list, just as you have it?
Well, we added PAPKEys. Would you prefer we make an amendment?
No, I just wanted to make sure we all knew what we were voting on, that's
Am
all.
I correct, Assembly, in assuming that,
I
we
believe
just
we're,
added PAPKEys?
I believe we're on the amendment that
And then the
Member
$100,000,
Lynn
well, we're
added.
voting on the amendment.
Right.
Correct. Okay, we're voting on the amendment to reduce the hospital request to
Thank you, Chelsea.
16.1. And yeah, this always gets confusing, a $100,000 separate request. Call the roll on the amendment, please.
Thank you. Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Jeff, Mark,
Yes.
Chelsea.
Yes.
Okay, so now as amended with PAPKEys being added and the dollar value changed, broke down on the hospital. If there's no other discussion on the way this is amended, will the clerk call the roll?
Yes, I will.
Please.
And David,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Chelsea.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a capital projects list to send to the state. Item C is 2022 SEPA board appointments. Without objection from the assembly, I'd like to appoint Assembly Member Lynn as the voting member and Utility Director Hageman as the alternate. Those are the only two letters of interest that were submitted, if I'm not incorrect, right, Clerk Thompson?
That is correct.
Okay, and that, so, if there's no objections, those appointments are made. Okay, I see no objections. And D, Public Safety Advisory Board appointment. We have a letter from Dan Sullivan expressing interest to be appointed to the seat on the Public Safety Advisory Board. That will fill that board. So without any, if the assembly approves with that, I would like to thank Dan Sullivan for putting his name in, appointing him to that board. Okay, that brings us to communications, and as usual, we have a list on the website, along with this agenda on our recent correspondence received since November 11th of 2021. That is available for the public to view. Assembly discussion items, child care relief funding request. Assembly Member Mucci requested discussion regarding funding relief request from Good Beginnings, preschool, Kinderskog Nature Program, and the Petersburg Children's Center. Member Mucci, since you asked for this, I'll let you speak first.
Sure, Mr. Mayor. It's going to be a short speech. Since we've received these letters, there's been a large discussion about how we're going to spend that ARPA funds that we have. I think it's like $640,000. And so while we do have those letters, I think Good Beginnings, Kinderskog, and Petersburg Children's Center are willing to wait until we've had a more, I guess, inclusive discussion about what we're going to do with the ARPA funds. I think there is going to be some discussion in early January with the community childcare assessment needs survey that was done. And I think that would be the first work session to have, listening to what they have to say about what they found were childcare needs. But so I think they're going to wait. They've asked me to wait, so I'm not going to speak any more on that. I think there's still a need for childcare funding relief program in Petersburg, but we'll get to that when we talk about the ARPA fund work session later on here under number B. Thank you.
Okay, any assembly members have input on this discussion item? Okay, seeing no hands coming up, and Jay indicating no. That brings us to ARPA fund work session. Assembly member Mucci requests an assembly work session to be held in January 2022 to discuss use of the American Rescue Plan Act funds received by the borough. Member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have this on there. It's something that we've been kind of kicking around for the last month and a half or so. We received this ARPA funding from the federal government. And we used some of it a couple of months ago or a month ago to complete the deck up at Mountain View Manor. And at that time, we talked about, well, what were we going to do with the rest of that money? And then it was mentioned in the discussion, well, we need to have a work session so we can figure out what the assembly wants to do with that money. In looking into the ARPA funds and what we can do with them, and Jody has sent us all a list of the guidelines for it, and it seems pretty loose. We can do pretty much almost anything with it as long as it's COVID related or something to improve life here in Petersburg for issues that are COVID related. Jody, also, I looked at how we spent the CARES Act funding, and it was broken down by percentages of what we use for just different entities in town, whether it's profit, nonprofit. And I think, you know, before we get a flood of people asking for this ARPA funds, I think the assembly needs to sit down and chat about what's the proper amount of this ARPA funding to spend within the community to certain things. I mean, I talked to Serendipity folks. They want to be involved into the conversation, as do, you know, I think all the nonprofits and for-profit organizations in Petersburg want to be part of this conversation. And I think having a work session sometime in mid-January would give us some time for staff to kind of put a plan together, whether it's percentage or just their ideas. I know they're tasked with doing a lot of stuff in the finance department, but I can't think of anybody else within the community who would help us spend this money in a responsible way. So I'm looking for a work session sometime in late January, just to kind of sit down with the assembly to kind of hear our thoughts and see what we want to do with the money. So people have an opportunity to figure out if they want to apply for some of it. So that's the purpose of this conversation piece. Thank you.
Okay, I talked to the member Lynn. No, go ahead.
I agree somewhat with Member Mucci that we need to decide to get some course of action. When I talked to Director Tal, probably been now 3 weeks ago or so, that we still didn't know how we didn't have all the criteria yet, how that money could be used. And from her perspective at that time, she wasn't even sure we were going to have that by January when I talked to her. Maybe that's changed, I don't know. So saying January, I don't think is reasonable. The other part of that is that I think that we need to look at this in a little bit different light than what we had before. This will probably be the very last set of funds that we get related to COVID and that sort of. So how we use those funds, I think, is extremely important. And for us just to have a work session or for somebody to put together a list, I don't think that's quite where I think we need a broader perspective on this, both with the school and the hospital. And the reason I say that is I think we need to look, what I'm going to think about is we got to look at the long term, because I don't think COVID's going to go away. I think it's going to change the way we do business. And I agree with one of the letters we recently got about, you know, there are engineering factors involved that we could fix things in town in both our public buildings and at our daycare centers and so forth. And so I think from my perspective, we need to have a broader perspective than just having a list. I think first of all, we need to have a dialogue on what they can be used for. And then second of all, is look at where we as an assembly want to go with that amount of money that we have here to be used most wisely before we even get down to maybe a list of what we want to do. At least that's my perspective.
You know, I was gonna, you know, if Jody's looking into this, and I had a brief conversation with the manager about this, and I think is Liz involved in trying to figure out what we can use the money for and what priorities in their mind.
And I can speak to some of that. the ARPA money is got far less restrictions on it than the initial CARES Act money did. So, you know, all the stuff you're thinking, probably we can use it for. Jody and Liz can probably give you a lot more specifics, but the truth of it is this ARPA funding is, I mean, we could use it on a senior center deck. It means we can probably use it on just about anything that you're thinking about. But I want to hesitate to say, it's like, we didn't get a lot of it. I mean, this is a whole lot different than CARES Act, where we got $4 million. We got a total of 634,000. We've already spent 20, so we have 614 left. So 614, that won't go very far. So I think if the assembly wants to put a program together, it's gonna have to be really targeted to one very specific, probably group, and you'll use up the biggest part of that. I think it is worthwhile having a conversation with the school and the hospital, because cost of masks, cost of testing, cost of vaccines, whatever those things are, at some point, does that change? And I can't answer that question, where the government's picking up the cost of those. Do they still pick up those costs? And what does the assembly want to work with the school and the hospital? And I can't answer that for you right now.
I would like to see some kind of a idea from Jody or from Liz or combined. But, you know, $614,000, if you put it towards the daycare entities, is that going to be expended for them for, you know, would that last them 6 months? Would it last them a year? So it's all kinds of things we need to look at. Member Tremblay?
Thank you. I agree that having the big long-term discussions are important and that the money will go faster than we probably anticipate. I would just also invite us to think about how many people were just kept out of work for up to 2 weeks at a time just now and might be struggling to think about their own immediate needs here in the next month or two. So I would actually hope that Director Tout, you know, we had utility bill support payments before. So some kind of, I personally am feeling a little more inclined towards more immediate community support that way, that people who need to stay home for quarantine purposes in order to keep their workplaces and their outside surroundings safer, that they're not dealing with possible heat shutoff or falling behind in rent. So that's where I'm personally feeling on this issue. Thank you, Member Michi, for bringing it up. And so I'm realizing we're throwing a lot at the wall for you and Director Tout to talk about, but hopefully we can keep having this conversation sooner than later. And if you're a member of the public that has opinions on this, like this is the American Rescue Plan, this is, you know, this is money for the people. And so please give us input on how you would see it and what you are seeing in your immediate surroundings, because it's easy for us, I think, to think about this in a purely systemic way. But if this could make a difference for a sizable chunk of town to stay comfortable in their homes this winter, I would rather it go towards that. Again, given it's a much less fiscal amount than we had before, I think that that's really important to keep in mind too as we go forward.
Any other discussion on this matter? Member Michi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I agree with Member Lind. We need to have the discussion, and I don't want to keep kicking this can down the road. I want to have the discussion. If Finance Director Tao and Liz need some time to put some type of, maybe some guidelines or just some suggestions for us. I mean, I'm willing to wait several weeks, but you know, the daycare issue, that's not going away. No, for me, one of the things, most important things I've learned from sitting up here is how important the daycare needs and the school system is in Petersburg. It is a building block for the local economy, and without a long-term solution to sorting out how we're going to make the daycare facilities in town, you know, so it's not a struggle for them. Our economy is going to struggle, and I don't want to kick this can down the road for 3 years when in the guidelines of that's when we have to spend this money. I'd like to have us look at, hey, these are the issues that are facing Petersburg. $614,000 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. It'll get frittered away and spent on programs. But yeah, I want to have the conversation sooner than later.
I would suggest then you call for a work session if you could get the support of 3 other assembly members. I believe that's how we'd have to do it, isn't it, Clerk Thompson? Or, you know, the mayor could call for it. Member Lynn?
Yeah, I know, I can't speak for the, well, one of the daycare centers, I can for the other one, but they have other grants out due to some of the same things. The problem I have is that I don't know enough about the state setting on quite a chunk of change related to daycare and related to some of the things that Member Tremblay talked about. And I don't know enough to be able to make any kind of rational judgment of how I would like to use our money with the fact that they have the money sitting there. And that's my dilemma right now. I don't want to make that decision because I don't know enough. And Liz probably knows, probably sit here for the next hour and talk about some of this that we're talking about. But that's my dilemma and why I don't want to jump just headlong into it immediately.
No, I agree with both Member Lynn and Member Mucci. I think we have to start the process, and the easiest way to do it is just do what we're doing now, sit down and talk about it. So yeah, if you make a motion, Member Mucci, I'll support it. I would like to say that I agree that daycare is a very important thing in this community, and if you ask anybody in town, everybody's looking for people to work. Well, guess what? If you don't have some place to take your kid, you can't go to work. So it's vital to the economy of this town. I could ask Steve what impact the closing of the daycare has on the operations of the borough. And that's just a microcosm, I'm sure, of what happens across the entire community. So I think it's an important thing that we address. But I also agree with Member Lynn that we need to look at this in a systematic way and try and get the most bang for our buck. So that's why I think work session would be good. Everybody can kind of come to the table. Ideas like Member Tremblay has, we can kind of flesh it out. But it sounds like the money's pretty wide open, at least in my interpretation of it. We just have to decide what the priority is in our community now. If we want to spend it right away, if we want to save it, how we want to do it. I think that's what we need to figure out.
No, through the mayor. One of the things that we've been slow on this purposely is because, as you mentioned, the state's got a lot of money. Knowing what the state's going to do helps, because then we don't spend $600,000 on something that they're already taken care of. And that's part of the challenge. I mean, Jody and Liz we come up with a list for you, and we will do that. But a lot of it is, it's a big wait and see, because they put a nice timeline on this ARPA funding that doesn't expire till 2024. We had time. Let's see what the state's going to do. Doesn't stop having a conversation and all that's, I think the Assembly's thinking well about that, but giving Jody and Liz a lot of credit. They actually had thought through this. It's like, let's find out what the state's going to do so we don't spend on top of that and we fill holes that the state isn't working on.
That makes total sense to me. Maybe that should be something, we can find out what amounts, these entities, daycares, for instance, need, and go to the state and say, "Why don't you help us out? We're, in a bind before we spend our $614,000." But that's whoever we want to approach it as an assembly.
It's really difficult. We've had such a hard time getting answers from the state, and I don't know that they're gonna. I mean, I don't think it's bad to talk about it. I just think it's really hard to say, okay, we're going to get an answer from the state. I can't promise you that.
I appreciate the discussion, but we're not going to take any action on it tonight. So today, I guess it's only afternoon, but so Friendly.
Yeah, thank you. Just that I agree again with all of this, but just the urgency of issues of utility payments and rent don't necessarily have that amount of lag time. So I would appreciate a January work session so that we can talk about what, if any, critical urgent needs are being seen in the community that we can try to rectify, because I'm not going to wait on the state legislature to get its act together for us to see how we can help most immediate in the community. So that's, Member Mucci, consider me a vote for that. And I guess we'll see if anyone else agrees, and then this won't be the last time we talk about it, for sure.
Okay, Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm willing to wait till Jody gets back, come and get some more information. But yeah, at the next assembly meeting, I'm gonna throw out some dates there for us to commit to a work session because I don't want to kick this can down the road. I mean, we will be waiting till the cows come in to get all the information that we all need, but the discussion has to start because the needs of the community for childcare are not going away. And whether there's rent assistance or heating assistance, those aren't going to go away. And this is the time of the year that they compound with the cold weather as we're seeing and stuff. And we need to start the conversation. I'm not saying it's going to end. The conversation will be done after one work session, but at least get the conversation started in mind. So I'll have a couple dates at the next assembly meeting. Thank you for the discussion.
Okay, is there any other input on this discussion item? Okay, the next one, item C, that was put on the assembly by member Kinzinger, and he's got a draft resolution proposed about a request from the U.S. Postal Service, I guess, for home mail delivery in Petersburg.
Yes, yeah, basically that's what it is. It's everywhere else, all other communities in Southeast Alaska, or even we're the largest community that doesn't have home delivered service. That doesn't mean that you have to get your mail delivered to your house. You can still keep the PO box. This resolution kind of came out with frustration that was expressed by several constituents and myself of our inability to get our mail, particularly our packages. And the more that I started thinking about it, having a couple of mail carriers in town isn't a bad deal. Those are very well-paying jobs with good benefits. So you have the added benefit that it's sort of an economic development approach too. The other thing that I did hear was quite a bit of feedback from a lot of local businesses that are having a hard time accessing the post office. You know, we live in an island that essentially the only way we get in and out of here is on a plane anymore. So we don't have the option of driving to another community to access a different post office if we're having issues here with ours. And the other thing that I think this does is it also gets the attention of the Postal Service and let them know that we want them to address what I feel and a lot of people in the community feel is poor service. And I understand it's going to cost money, but we're costing the Postal Service money. But if we do get delivered service, then we're going to save a lot of money individually in our individual time that we have to spend going to the post office. And then a lot of time that the businesses have to spend paying an employee to go up to the post office to receive mail. I talked about this at the last Chamber Board meeting, and in our packet, there's a letter of support from the Chamber of Commerce. Most of the businesses in town feel this would be a big benefit. And the way it works in the communities here in Southeast with delivered services, usually they don't have mailboxes right on your house anymore. They'll have a bank of boxes at the end of a block, and that's where the mail carrier goes and delivers the mail to. In most of the other communities, the mail is delivered right to the individual businesses. So there's any number of ways that it can do this, and you go anywhere in the United States, even out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, even more nowhere than we are here, and they have mail rural delivery routes where they deliver the mail. So it's not an unreasonable request. And I put this on this meeting as a discussion item so people could take a look at it and make some comments. And if there's interest from the assembly, then we could pass this resolution at the next meeting if they so choose. Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I want to thank Member Kinzinger for bringing this up. I mean, I think it's a daily conversation for all of us up here about the post office. Yeah, I think this is a good start. I do think you have to be careful talking about poor service up at the post office because they are struggling up there. They've got a full contingent of people up there, and they're struggling with folks that sometimes might customers who don't have all their stuff together by the time they get up to the front of the line. So that's holding things up. They're struggling with COVID. They've got 2 people who were out with COVID, and they're struggling with customers who won't wear a mask. I hear people say, I I'm in line for an hour and I've got to be here. And I keep telling people, if you're in a hurry, the post office is not where you want to be. That is the last place in town you want to be if you're in a hurry. Yeah, I think this resolution would be great. And I think we need to focus, well, a whereas somewhere about getting the businesses an hour or two in the morning to pick up their mail or their boxes and stuff. Because without the businesses having their shelves full of stuff, we can't buy it. And if we can't find it downtown, all those people up in line up in the post office are getting it on Amazon or somewhere else. That we need to make sure that the businesses downtown have it so that we can purchase it, so that we can support the local businesses. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing this next assembly meeting. But thank you very much for putting it on there.
Any other input on the mail delivery, home mail delivery? Okay, next item is Alaska Natives Without Land legislation. I put it on as a discussion item. Talked about it briefly in the mayor's report. I believe we all have copies of the newest version of the maps we could get and the new legislation. Encourage the public to look at it. If you have any input, email the assembly members, or and I think we need to take some kind of action on it as an assembly. So I intend to put it on the next assembly agenda as an action item. And like I said earlier in my mayor's report, I'll try to call in. It'll be kind of late where I'm going to be at, but I can stay up to 9 o'clock, I think. So anyway, is any other input on this? Remember, Michi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Just a
Mayor.
question.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Has any of the assembly members seen a comparison of this bill versus the previous bill, or versus any other, or a comparison back to ANGSCA and the differences? I haven't seen one.
I haven't compared the language between this bill and the one from last legislative session or congressional session.
Okay, so
Have you
nobody else
compared?
has seen one either that somebody has done it. No.
Can we still have that?
Yes,
Can we get copies of that?
Yes,
Just as well?
you bet. I'll send out copies of the old legislation
Does that
to
help,
you.
Mr. Lynn?
Yes, thank you.
Remember Michi?
We certainly can have as an action item at the next meeting, but we better be prepared. We better be prepared to act on it if we are going to have a resolution in support or not for this legislation. And I think there's a few more steps that have to happen with this legislation before we get wound up with a room full of people wanting us to support something or not to support something until that legislation has been, crafted. I've been trying to find out what steps have to happen between it's been introduced and any markups it has to go through, any changes that might happen. And I know we've heard earlier in the meeting that people had questions about the maps and the Portage Bay cabins, and I'm sure there's going to be questions about what's going on over at the Thomas Bay land selections and the land selections here around in Petersburg. And so to have it as an action item, I'd hate to see us put it on as an action item and it not go the way that the assembly really wants it to go until we know what we're talking about. And I'm not, at this point, I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about. So that's just
What we're talking about is whether we support the legislation to give the 23,000 acres in our area and the $1.5 million to a potential new urban corporation in Petersburg. I don't know how fast this can happen, but when this legislation was introduced in the prior congressional session, we didn't know about it till it was already had a public hearing. So next thing you know, you wake up and they voted on it, added it to a bill, and it's done, and you don't get maybe the assembly doesn't want to weigh in. Maybe we don't want to give our public opinion as elected officials, but I think this is a big issue for the area myself. Remember, Lynn?
Thank you. I agree with, at some point we have to take a position, but I think there was some questions asked today that brought things to mind to me that I hadn't thought about before. As a comparison to the original ANGSCA bill, what this bill contains. And I'm not smart enough off the top of my head to know what all these differences are. But I do think there were some really serious questions asked that I'd like to hear addressed, because I would think that ought to be part of our position if in fact we decide to take one. I'd just like to know the ins and outs and the nuances of how that compares to the original ANGSCA.
our conversation with the Zoom meeting with Sea Alaska the other day, it was touched on, and I brought it up. I said, you know, they know it's been reintroduced, and we, you know, I don't know what the borough's position on it will be, if we will take a position. But it seems to me like we asked questions of the federal delegation. They did a speedy visit through Petersburg, didn't really give any definite answers to our questions. And so, yeah, here we are again. In fact, the discussion was that the maps will be changed, and I can't remember if it was, Mr. Reinhardt at the Sea Alaska call-in that mentioned, I said, I gave the comparison or the situation where I went to Hobart Bay and my son and a friend of mine and I weren't allowed to go on the beach because there's no trespassing signs. He said, this is different. That has been changed from ANCSA. Well, where does it say that? I don't see that. So I think they're leaving it kind of vague, and then with the reasonable restrictions in the language still. Maybe if the assembly doesn't want to, if I put it on as, someone puts it on the agenda as an action item, if it doesn't get a motion or a second, then we don't discuss it, or we don't vote on it at that time. But I think we need to do our homework, try to figure out where we want to be on this. Member Michi, and then.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, like you said, if we've asked the congressional delegation or folks questions and they're just ignoring them or not answering them, I don't know how we can take a position on it. I mean, I've got documents at my house that are this tall about from the dialogue that went on when Ted Stevens was putting this all together and this, that, the other. And I have a relative good understanding of the whole process, and I think there's some good questions out there, but what we need to get addressed. And yeah, one way or other, if we support it or we want to talk about it, but I mean, I think those questions are still out there until they get answered. I'm going to be a little uncomfortable moving forward, but yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I want to echo what you said earlier, Mayor, that this is an issue that definitely affects a lot of people in our community. And I feel like it's incumbent upon us as the representatives to make some statement about it to one way or the other, not just ignore it. So I think we should definitely discuss it and have it as an action item at some point in the future.
Even if the action is that we are asking for more clarification and better answers to our questions, I asked or mentioned it at the Sea Alaska Zoom meeting about the Madollin's cabin in Dry Cove in Portage Bay. But then reading through the legislation a little bit, if there's a lease in place, I think that lease would be transferred to the Native Corporation, and then they would be in charge of the land lease. But are they going to put, if it's like the Forest Service now on cabins that were built on Forest Service land, if it's in the youngest person's name in a family, when that person passes away, now it's gone. Your lease is gone. So that's the Forest Service's policy now. So would that be Sea Alaska's or the Urban Corporation's policy? There's all kinds of things left to answer. So anyway, this I just thought we should talk about it because it's reintroduced. Member Kinsinger.
Yeah, not to be off topic, but the thing I don't understand is all the other native village corporations like around Cake and Goon, they all pretty much selected their land in a block. And the thing that I have heartburn with this current legislation is there are so many little bits and pieces throughout the entire area that from a management perspective, I defer to other people that are actually do that for a living. It looks like it's going to be nearly impossible to manage. I mean, even if they did want to restrict your access to their property, it's going to be impossible for them to do because there's so many pieces all over the place. You wouldn't even know whether you're on the national forest or what type of land you're on. I mean, that's the case as it is right now. So just from it seems really strange the whole way this is developed. I'd feel a lot more comfortable if they were given a block of land like the other corporations were in the original ANCSA legislation, and then everybody kind of knew, okay, this belongs to the local urban corporation, and it makes management from from my perspective, for them, a lot easier too, instead of picking a piece here and a piece there. But that's probably off the topic of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I guess I just, I thought it was important to have this discussion. We had it earlier with the public comment for months, I believe, and got quite a bit, and maybe we will get more. It was an education before when it was first introduced. The public wasn't really aware that it was even happening. So at least it is, and I know as far as the lands and the maps, I agree with Member Kinsinger. There's just selected land all over. Looks like, prime pieces of real estate. And the Ketchikan group had selected north end of Prince of Wales, most of the land on Prince of Wales. Since then, those maps have been revised. I haven't read Bay's not on it anymore. So anyway, we'll see how the discussion goes if there's no other. Member Tremblay.
Thank you. For anyone not clear, we started this comment section because we as the Assembly couldn't really necessarily respond to public comments that were given to us. And so we kind of built in this window on the agenda. So that's kind of the spirit of my comments today. I'm going to try to keep them short. Happy Hanukkah. Last night was the 8th day or evening of marking it. And I hope that everyone in community who does mark it had a nice 8 days. I don't let myself apologize for the actions of others, so I won't do that. But I will say that I feel a lot of sorrow and anger that the airwaves of this meeting were used to compare the current situation to the Holocaust that happened in Europe. To me, it's worth outlining how extremely misrepresentative that comparison was. The mass death of World War II disproportionately affecting the Jewish population of Europe included members of the disabled, Roma, communist, and gay populations, as well as political opponents. And that was because those groups were deemed disposable by the ruling party. Right now in the United States, courts are finding that politically motivated bans on mask mandates are actually violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, since it infringes on the rights of disabled members of a community from being able to fully participate in public space. And right now, the partisanship of the pandemic is having a real life consequence, according to an analysis that NPR did using county death rates. The reddest 10th of the country in October saw death rates that were 6 times higher than the bluest counties of the country. And a lot of that is because of the vaccination rates are proportionally in those counties low to red, high vaccination rates to blue. And that's because political leaders let their partisanship overrule what public health mandates or public health recommendations say. An example, I pay attention to news outlets from all kinds of places. Before Brian found his way to Alaska on a boat, he was working in a microbiology lab in St. Louis. So I pay attention to St. Louis and Missouri news. And there was a recent news report that the Missouri State Public Health commissioned a report to analyze mask usage to COVID rates. And they found that counties that had mask mandates had much lower COVID rate than counties that didn't have it. And they withheld that information from both other members of the government and the public at large because it was politically disadvantageous for them to talk about it out loud. So journalists brought that to attention. Now we all know. So I guess I'd just like to thank members of the community that don't let things like partisanship influence how they act right now, because we're all just here trying to make a better place for our community. And that does matter every day, but especially right now when we're just trying to have a nice month of December. So thank you for that moment.
The other assembly members have comments this afternoon?
Brief comment. Several people spoke today about the precedent-setting nature of some of the ideas discussed in this bill that Murkowski has just reintroduced, and the fact that perhaps we should not fiddle with ANCSA. And I have a hard time believing that legislation passed in the 70s by a bunch of white male politicians is really the high watermark in terms of what we can do and for reparations, what we've done to people who lived in this country. So I don't see why it's a bad idea to reassess that. And if there is precedent setting, maybe that's a good thing. You know, equality should always be the goal, total equality, not expedience. Anyway, thank you.
Any other assembly members have comments today? If not, that brings us to recognitions. Are there any recognitions from assembly members or staff? Member Tremblay.
I missed my moment to thank Dr. Tassilo personally when he was here, so I'd just like to say that again. He is volunteering to help us as a public health officer, and that's putting him in a certain position that may not be the most comfortable, but is greatly appreciated for informing us, informing the broader public, and on top of doing his job. And so I'm just feeling really grateful for him and for the rest of Petersburg Medical Center staff for all that they're doing.
Okay, any other recognitions? Any of the staff have recognitions? Thanks for keeping the streets plowed and doing a good job. So sounds like there's more to come. All right, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second, third.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Never get a vote for that.
Oh, we want to see where you're gonna go?